Good morning, Jay with Great Scott Audio Productions and Bitten by Books Book Bites. We're going to go a little bit far afield for most folks. We're going to do some science fiction today. This is a series of books that I've been reading since 1981 or 82, if I remember. In fact, this book is from 1981 or 1982. It's Alan Dean Foster's Flinx of the Commonwealth series. The first book he wrote in 1972, but chronologically it's the second book. He came along later and wrote For Love of Mother Not, which became the first book. But what I'm going to do is start with the original first book, chapter 1, so we get introduced to my screen name in quite a few occasions. Flinx is one of my favorite characters of all time, and the story, 14 books, a huge number of years. The series just finished about 3 or 4 years ago. With that, just the progression of Flinx and his demeanor and his character has meant so much to me over the last 35 years, and the time that I've been reading these books. So let's go ahead and meet Flinx and see what we think. The Flinx was an ethical thief, in that he only stole from the crooked, and at that, only when it was absolutely necessary. Well, perhaps not absolutely, but he tried to. Due to his environment, his morals were of necessity of a highly adaptable nature, and when one is living alone and has not yet reached one's 17th summer, certain allowances in such matters must be made. It could be argued, if the Flinx were willing to listen, a most unlikely happenstance, that the ultimate decision as to who qualified as crooked and who did not was an awfully totalitarian one to have to make. A philosopher would nod knowingly in agreement. Flinx could not afford that luxury. His ethics were dictated by survival and not abstracts. It was to his great credit that he had managed to remain on the accepted side of current temporal morality as much as he had so far. Then again, chance was also due to a fair share of the credit. As a rule, though, he came by his modest income mostly honestly. This was made necessary as much by reason of common sense as by choice. A too successful thief always attracts unwanted attention. Eventually, a criminal law of diminishing returns takes over. And anyway, the jails of Dralar were notoriously inhospitable. Good locations in the city for traveling jongleurs, minstrels, and such to display their talents were limited. Some were far better than others. That he, at his comparatively slight age, had managed to secure one of the best was a tribute to luck and the tenacity of old Mother Mastiff. From his infancy she had reserved the small raised platform next to her shop for him, driving off other entrepreneurs with shout or shot, as the occasion and vehemence of the interloper required. Mother Mastiff was not her real name, of course, but that was what everyone called her, Flinx included. Real names were of little use in Dralar's marketplaces. They served poorly for identification, and too well for tax gatherers. So more appropriate ones were rapidly bestowed upon each new inhabitant. Mother Mastiff, for example, bore a striking resemblance to the Tar-Aiym canine of the same name. It was given in honor and accepted with poor grace, but accepted nevertheless. Her caustic personality only tended to complement the physical similarity. The man-child had been an orphan, probably involuntarily, as most of his ilk were. Still, who could tell? Had she not been passing the slave coops at the time and glanced casually in a certain direction, she would never have noticed it. For reasons she never fully understood, she had bought it, raised it, and set it to learning a trade as soon as it was old enough. Fortunately, his theatrical proclivities had manifested themselves at quite an early age, along with his peculiar talents. So the problem of choosing a trade solved itself. He proved to be a keen, if somewhat solemn observer, and so his own best apprentice. Fine and well, because older performers always became more nervous in his presence than they cared to admit. Rather than admit it, they pronounced him unteachable and left him to his own devices. She had also taught him, as early as was practical, that Drowlar independence was ever so much more than an intangible thought. It was a possession, even if it would not fit into one's pocket or pouch, and to be valued as such. Still, when he had taken her to her word and moved out to live on his own, the sadness lingered with her as a new coat of paint. But she never revealed it to him for fear of communicating weakness. Not in her words or in her face. Urged on affectionately but firmly he was, much as the young birds of the poles. Also she knew that for her moment might come at any time, and she wanted it to brush his life as lightly as possible. Flinx felt the cottony pain of a sugar-coated probe again in his mind. The knowledge that Mother Mastiff was his mother by dint of sympathy and not birth. Coincidence was his father, and luck his inheritance. Of his true parents he knew nothing, nor had the auctioneer. His card had been even more than usually blank, carrying not even the most elementary pedigree. A mongrel. It showed in his long orange-red hair and olive complexion. The reason for his orphanage would remain forever as obscure as their faces. He let the life of the city enter his mind, and submerge the unpleasant thoughts. A tourist with more insight than most had once remarked that strolling through the great central marketplace of Drowlar was like standing in a low surf and letting the geometrically patient waves lap increasingly against one. Flinx had never seen the sea, so the reference remained obscure. There were few seas on Moth anyway, and no oceans. Only the uncounted innumerable lakes of the blue that blinded and shamed azure as a pale intonation. The planet had moved with unusual rapidity out of its last ice age. The fast-dwindling ice sheets had left its surface pockmarked with the glittering lapis lazuli embroidery of lakes, tarns, and great ponds. An almost daily rainfall maintained the water levels initially set by the retreating glaciers. Drowlar happened to be situated in an exceptionally dry valley, good drainage, and lack of rainfall, and more specifically mud, being one of the principal reasons for the city's growth. Here merchants could come to trade their goods and craftsmen to set up their shop without fear of being washed out every third month. The evaporation-precipitation water cycle on Moth also differed from that of any otherwise similar Humanx-type planets. Deserts were precluded by the lack of any real mountain ranges to block off moisture-laden air. The corresponding lack of oceanic basins and the general unevenness of the terrain never gave a major drainage system a chance to get started. The rivers of Moth were as uncountable as the lakes, but for the most part small in both length and volume, so the water of the planet was distributed fairly evenly over its surface, with the exception of the two great ice caps at the poles and the hemispheric remnants of the great glacial systems. Moth was the Terran Great Plains with conifers instead of corn. The polyrhythmic chanting of barkers hawking the goods of 1,000 worlds formed a nervous and jarring counterpart to the comparatively even susurrations and murmurings of the crowd. Flinx passed a haberdashery he knew, and in passing exchanged a brief secret smile with its owner. That worthy, a husky, blond, middle-aged human, had just finished selling a pair of Durfwak skin coats to two outlandishly clad outworlders for 3 times what they were worth. Another saying trickled lazily through his mind. Those who come to unprepared to Drowlar to buy skin inevitably get. It did not offend Flinx's well-considered set of ethics. This was not stealing. Caveat emptor. fur and fibers, wood and water were moth. Can one steal seeds from a tomato? The seller was happy with his sale, the purchasers were pleased with their purchases, and the difference would go to support the city in the form of welfares and grafts anyway. Besides, any outworlder who could afford to come to Moth could damn well afford to pay its prices. The merchants of Dralar were not, to any extent, rapacious, only devious. Thanks for starting this journey with me this week. Next time we're going to go and visit Mark Del Franco. Unquiet Dreams, the Connor Gray series. It's a lot of fun. I think you guys will really like it. And then we're going to do one that, to me, we're going to go a little further beyond this time. We're going to visit Vicky Pedersen and the Signs of the Zodiac. And that'll be in 4 weeks, I believe. I can't say enough good things about Vic. And that'll be a super special kind of thing for me. And so stay tuned. So next time, Mark Del Franco, Unquiet Dreams. And then after that, Vicky Pedersen, Scent of Shadows, The Signs of the Zodiac. Thanks and have a good week.